Every Friday at exactly 6 p.m., there was a knock on my door, always gentle, always followed by the scent of lilies. My husband, Daniel, would walk in holding a bouquet, wrapped in white paper, a shy smile on his face, and say, "For the woman who makes life worth coming home to." I used to think it was love, the kind of love people wrote poetry about. Friends envied me. Strangers at the florist called me the lucky one. For 7 years, I believed it too. Until one Friday, he came home without the flowers. No apology, no reason, just silence and trembling hands that wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the night I learned that every bouquet he'd ever given me wasn't a symbol of devotion. It was a confession in disguise. And when I found out what the flowers really meant, I never looked at lilies the same way again. For 7 years, Daniel brought me flowers every Friday. Not once did he forget. Not once did he let the day slip by. It became our ritual, predictable, beautiful, and comforting, like the rhythm of a heart you never question because it's always been there. He'd arrive just after work, still in his navy blue suit, the faint smell of cologne mixing with the crisp scent of lilies. He always chose lilies. "They remind me of you," he'd say, brushing a stray hair from my face. Pure, soft, steady. At first, I'd laugh at the sentimentality. Daniel wasn't a man of grand gestures. He was quiet, the kind of person who found peace in order. The same breakfast every morning, the same route to work, the same spot on the couch every evening. The flowers were his one flourish, his way of saying, "I'm thinking of you," without needing words. I used to think that was love, steady, reliable, fragrant like the lilies he placed on our kitchen table every week. The first time he brought them, it was the day after our wedding. I woke up to find a single white lily on my pillow, still cool with morning dew. A note beneath it read, "To new beginnings," that set the pattern for everything that followed. Birthdays, anniversaries, ordinary Fridays, all marked by flowers. Sometimes he'd leave them on the counter with a note. Sometimes he'd hand them to me with a kiss. Once, he even sent them to my office with a card that said, "Just because." I remember my coworkers staring in admiration. "You're so lucky," one of them whispered. "My husband barely remembers our anniversary, and yours gives you flowers every week." I smiled, basking in the quiet pride of being loved like that. I didn't know that behind every bouquet, there was something wilting, something he couldn't tell me. There's a photo I keep from our early years. Daniel is standing behind me, his arms around my shoulders, both of us smiling at the camera. On the table in front of us, a vase full of lilies. Whenever I look at that photo now, I notice the smallest detail, the way his eyes don't quite meet the camera, as if they're already looking elsewhere. Back then, I never noticed. Love blinds you gently. It doesn't demand blindness, it invites it. We met at a charity event. I was volunteering at a children's art stall, and he was helping with logistics. He wasn't charming in the loud way some men are. He was thoughtful, deliberate, the kind of person who spoke less but made every word count. When he asked me to dinner, I said yes before my mind could catch up to my heart. 2 years later, we were married in a small ceremony by the lake. And for a long time, I believed I had found the kind of love people spend lifetimes searching for. Every Friday, I'd place the new bouquet in a vase, trimming the stems, changing the water, discarding the old ones. Except one. There was one bouquet I never threw away, the one from our first anniversary. I dried the petals, pressed them between the pages of a book, and kept them in my drawer. Whenever I felt tired or lonely, I'd open the book and breathe in the faint scent that lingered, as if love itself had left a trace for me to remember. It was all so ordinary, so peaceful, until it wasn't. The first crack appeared in the simplest of ways. It was a Friday like any other. Daniel had texted me at lunch, "Running late tonight. Don't wait for me to eat." I didn't think much of it. He often worked long hours at the firm. But around 9 p.m., when I heard a knock at the door, I smiled because I knew it would be him, flowers in hand, just like always. Only this time it wasn't him. It was a delivery boy. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked, holding out a bouquet wrapped in white paper. "Yes." He handed it to me. "For you. Paid in advance." The flowers were lilies. Beautiful, white, and fresh as always. But the card inside made my heart skip. It said only 2 words. Forgive me. No signature. No note. Just those 2 words. I stood in the kitchen staring at the bouquet, my pulse suddenly too loud. Daniel came home an hour later, without flowers. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes shadowed. "Long day," he said, kissing my forehead. "You okay?" I nodded slowly, glancing at the lilies on the counter. "You sent these?" He followed my gaze, paused for a split second, barely noticeable, and then smiled. "Of course. Friday, remember?" Something in his voice trembled, a note of unease, quickly buried. But once you hear a crack, you can't unhear it. That night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the scent of lilies too strong, too sweet, almost suffocating. The next Friday, he came home with roses instead. "Change of season," he said lightly, setting them down. "Thought we'd try something new." I wanted to believe him, but roses weren't his thing. Daniel hated cliches. He said flowers like lilies were elegant, not obvious. I smiled and thanked him anyway, pretending nothing had shifted. But inside, unease had already taken root. It grew over the following weeks, in small silences, in the way he avoided his phone when I was near, in how he'd stare too long at nothing during dinner. And the flowers, they began to arrive again, like clockwork, but never from him directly. Always delivered, always with a different note. Some said, "Miss you." Some said, "You're my reason." One said, "It's over." That one came 3 months before everything fell apart. The day I found the truth started like any other. It was spring, soft sunlight pouring through the windows, the air smelling faintly of earth and promise. Daniel had already left for work. On the kitchen table, the latest bouquet waited, lilies as usual. As I reached to replace the vase water, something slipped from the wrapping. A small, folded receipt. It wasn't from the florist we always used. It was from another shop across town. Curious, I tucked it into my purse. Later that afternoon, after work, I drove there. The shop was small, hidden between a bakery and a stationery store. A woman behind the counter looked up as I entered. "Welcome," she said warmly. "Looking for something special?" I smiled nervously. "Actually, I think my husband's been buying flowers here." She tilted her head. "What's his name?" "Daniel Carter." Her expression flickered. Just for a moment, surprise, maybe recognition. Then she nodded slowly. "Oh yes, he comes every week." "Lilies, right?" My heart stuttered. "Yes, for me." She hesitated, biting her lip. "Are you sure?" "What do you mean?" The woman reached under the counter, pulled out a small card, cream-colored, elegant handwriting. "He always asked me to include this," she said softly. "For Rachel." I stared at the name until the letters blurred. Rachel, not my name. That night, when Daniel came home, I didn't greet him at the door. The bouquet he'd brought lay on the counter, unopened. He looked at me, confusion flashing across his face. "What's wrong?" I held up the card. "Who's Rachel?" His face drained of color. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't have an answer ready. He froze. His face, usually so calm, so composed, twisted like glass cracking under pressure. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. "The florist," I said, my voice shaking. "The one across town. The one you go to every Friday." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His fingers twitched like he was trying to hold on to something invisible. Maybe the truth, maybe the last bit of control he had left. "Who is Rachel?" I repeated. Still silence. Then, barely a whisper, "She was a mistake." The words hung in the air like smoke. I remember the exact way my stomach dropped, as if the floor had vanished beneath me. A mistake. That was what 7 years of flowers were worth. Not devotion, not tenderness. A distraction from guilt. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. "It's not what you think." I laughed, bitterly, brokenly. "Then by all means, Daniel, tell me what I should think. Because the florist says you've been buying lilies every week for a woman named Rachel." He sank into the chair, elbows on his knees, eyes on the floor. She was a patient. That made me stop. A patient. He nodded slowly. From the hospital, Daniel worked as a trauma surgeon. Long hours, life and death pressure. I'd always admired him for it. But I also knew how the line between care and connection could blur when someone lives constantly between pain and healing. I was treating her after an accident, he said. She didn't have family. She was in the ICU for months. I started bringing her flowers because he paused, searching for words, because I didn't know how else to help her keep fighting. I folded my arms, and that continued for 3 years. Every Friday, he looked up, his eyes rimmed with guilt. After she was discharged, she sent me a message once. Said she kept the lilies I brought her, so they made her feel like she wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't reply, but the next week, I sent flowers just to let her know someone cared. And then I couldn't stop. I stared at him in disbelief. You couldn't stop? I didn't love her, he said quickly. I swear, Emily, it wasn't like that. But my heart had already started to unravel. The next few days were a blur. He tried to explain. I tried to listen. But love is fragile once it starts to rot. No matter how much you patch it, the cracks keep widening. I kept seeing her name everywhere. Rachel, the woman in the flowers. I imagined her, fragile, pale, lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by lilies Daniel had chosen with the same care he used to choose mine. I imagined him sitting by her bedside, talking softly, his voice calm and steady, the same voice that had once soothed my fears. And I couldn't stop wondering, when did the flowers stop being mine? One evening, I decided to find her, not to confront her. I didn't even know what I wanted. Closure, maybe. Clarity. Proof that this wasn't some elaborate cruelty. I remember the hospital he worked at, the patient registry he'd shown me once during a fundraiser. It wasn't hard to find a trace. Rachel Miles, admitted after a car accident, multiple fractures, long recovery. Discharged 2 years ago. A small part of me hoped she'd moved far away, started fresh, forgotten him. But fate rarely gives mercy to those who need it most. A quick search online told me she still lived nearby, a small address in the next town over. I sat in the car outside her house for almost an hour before I could move. It was a modest place, a tiny front porch, a flower bed overgrown with weeds, and in the window, lilies. White, fresh, and perfectly arranged. My chest tightened. I walked up and knocked. When she opened the door, she looked younger than I expected. Late 20s, maybe. Her hair was cut short, her face pale but kind. She blinked at me uncertainly. Yes. I hesitated. Are you Rachel? She nodded slowly. I am. I couldn't bring myself to say Daniel's wife. It felt too sharp, too heavy. I'm Emily, I said instead. You might not know me, but I think we have someone in common. Her expression softened almost immediately. You're his wife. So she did know. She stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the house smelled faintly of disinfectant and flowers. On every table, every shelf, lilies. Some fresh, some dried, some pressed into frames. My throat felt dry. You really love them. She smiled sadly. They kept me alive once. We sat down. I didn't know how to start, so she did. Daniel told me about you, she said quietly. Not much, but enough for me to know you were good to him. I used to ask if he ever brought you flowers too. The room tilted slightly. And what did he say? She hesitated. He said he always would, because that's what you do when you love someone you've hurt. Her words sliced through me. When he stopped bringing them, she continued, I knew something had changed. I thought maybe he'd finally forgiven himself. I frowned. Forgiven himself? For what? She looked at me with a kind of compassion I didn't deserve. You don't know, do you? Know what? She took a deep breath. I wasn't just his patient. The car accident I was in, the one that put me in the hospital, it wasn't random. Your husband was the surgeon on call that night. He saved my life, but he couldn't save the drivers. I felt cold all over. The driver? She nodded. His name was Michael Harper. The name didn't mean anything until she added softly, he was your husband's best friend. I just stared at her. Every flower, every note, every Friday suddenly rearranged itself into something far darker, far sadder than infidelity. Rachel looked down at her hands. Daniel never forgave himself. He said he should have been the one driving that night. He was supposed to give Michael a ride home, but he stayed late at the hospital. Michael offered to go instead, said he wanted to surprise his wife with flowers. Her eyes flicked up to mine. Lilies, I think. The room spun. So every week, I whispered, he bought flowers to atone. She nodded gently. For Michael. For me, I left her house without saying goodbye. The air outside felt too sharp, too full of truth. By the time I reached the car, my hands were trembling. For years, I thought those flowers were love letters. Then I thought they were signs of betrayal. But they were neither. They were apologies, sent into the world like prayers he couldn't speak aloud. When I got home that night, Daniel was sitting at the table, head in his hands. He didn't look up as I entered. "I should have told you," he said softly, but I didn't know how. Every time I tried, the words turned into excuses. I sat down across from him. "Why lilies?" I asked quietly. "Because Michael's wife loved them," he said, "and because they were the last thing I saw in his car that night." He finally met my eyes. "I started bringing them to you the next day. I thought if I kept doing it, maybe I could rewrite the ending somehow. Maybe love could cover guilt." There was nothing left to say, just two people sitting in the silence between grief and forgiveness. The flowers on the counter looked different now. No longer symbols of love or deceit, but echoes of a past neither of us had escaped. That night, the house smelled of lilies and rain. Daniel hadn't moved from the table. The petals had begun to wilt under the kitchen light, curling at the edges, soft white turning faintly brown, like the past finally running out of perfume. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Words felt too fragile for the kind of silence we shared. Finally, he said, "It was raining that night." His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I remember every sound. The sirens, the tires skidding, the way the glass shattered. They brought them both in, Michael and Rachel. She was barely breathing. He was gone before I even reached the room. He paused, staring at the table as if the memory itself were carved into the wood. "I wasn't supposed to be working that night," he said. "We were supposed to meet for dinner, the three of us. You, me, and Michael. But I stayed behind for an emergency surgery." He called to say he'd pick up the flowers on his way. I swallowed hard, the edges of memory slicing back. That dinner I'd set the table for, the phone call that never came, the police officer's quiet knock on the door. All this time, I'd buried that pain, thinking it belonged only to me. I never realized Daniel had been living inside the same night, over and over again. He continued, his eyes distant. I saw his car when they brought it in. There were lilies on the seat beside him. I picked one up before they took him to the morgue. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to save something from the wreckage. He looked at me then, really looked like a man begging to be seen beyond his sin. The next day, I brought those flowers home to you. I couldn't tell you why. I just needed to. And then I did it again the next week. And again. It became a way of keeping him alive, of reminding myself that love should still mean something. His voice broke, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being about him. It became about guilt, about me trying to prove to myself that I hadn't destroyed everything good in my life. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, to throw the flowers across the room and make him feel even a fraction of the confusion, the betrayal, the heartbreak that was tearing through me. But all I saw was a man suffocating under his own remorse, a man who'd carried his grief like a ritual, one bouquet at a time. The next few days moved quietly, like the world itself had turned down its volume. He went to work. I pretended to sleep when he came home. We coexisted like ghosts in the same house, haunted by the same truth. Every time I passed the kitchen table, the empty vase stared back at me, a hollow reminder of all the Fridays that had once meant love, then guilt, then nothing at all. One morning, I woke up to find the vase filled again. Not with lilies this time, but wildflowers. Simple, uneven, imperfect. There was no note, just a quiet offering. For a moment, I wanted to throw them away. But instead, I found myself changing the water, trimming the stems, setting them back in the light. Not because I forgave him, but because I finally understood what forgiveness really was, not forgetting but allowing the pain to breathe. That evening, he came home early. "I thought maybe we could talk," he said hesitantly. I nodded. We sat across from each other again, but this time, he didn't look away. After Michael died, he said, I couldn't stand the silence. I kept hearing his voice, the last thing he said before hanging up that night. "I'll bring her flowers. Don't be late." He clenched his jaw. When I saw Rachel in that hospital bed, I thought maybe saving her would make up for losing him. She was young, terrified, completely alone. I started bringing her lilies because I couldn't bring them to him. I didn't realize that every bouquet was keeping me trapped in that night. I asked softly, "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked pained. "Because I didn't want to drag you into my guilt. You'd already lost them too. I thought the flowers could be something good, something beautiful, a way of giving back what that night took from us both." I let out a trembling breath. "But they weren't for me, Daniel." "Not really." He nodded. "I know that now." It rained that night again, like some quiet, poetic punishment from the sky. I stood by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, each one catching the light like the ghosts of all the years we'd shared. Behind me, Daniel said quietly, "Do you want me to stop?" I turned. "Stop what?" "The flowers." I hesitated. The question carried more weight than it seemed. The flowers were no longer just flowers. They were symbols, memories, scars. "Yes," I said finally. "I think it's time." He nodded slowly, eyes wet. "Okay." It was the smallest word, but it felt like an ending, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something else. In the weeks that followed, our house smelled different, less floral, more real. No more Friday bouquets. No more empty gestures trying to fix the unfixable. Instead, there were quiet breakfasts, shared glances, tentative laughter returning like light through a cracked window. Sometimes I catch him staring at the garden, lost in thought. Once, I asked him what he was thinking. "I keep wondering if guilt ever fades," he said softly. "Maybe it doesn't," I replied. "Maybe we just learn to live around it." He nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Then I'll learn." A few months later, I found him sitting in the yard, planting something new. "What are those?" I asked. "Lilies," he said, "but not white ones this time. Yellow." "Why yellow?" "They symbolize gratitude," he said, looking up at me. "For second chances." I stood there for a long moment, watching him press the soil around the flowers. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see the man who'd lied. I saw the man who'd broken and was trying to rebuild. Maybe we were both doing that, rebuilding in the only way we knew how. That evening, I took the old dried bouquet from the drawer, the one from our first anniversary. The petals were brittle now, barely holding their shape. I carried them outside and scattered them around the new lilies he'd planted. He looked up, startled. "What are you doing?" "Letting them rest," I said simply. The wind caught the petals, swirling them gently into the grass. For a moment, it felt like the house itself exhaled. Later that night, as we sat together on the porch, he said quietly, "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me." I looked at him, really looked, the lines under his eyes, the hands that had once trembled as he held the flowers. "I don't know either," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try." He reached for my hand, hesitant, as if afraid I might pull away. I didn't. For the first time in years, the silence between us didn't hurt. It healed. 6 months passed. The lilies in our garden bloomed and withered, bloomed and withered again. Seasons changed, and with them, so did we. Slowly, gently, like a wound learning how to become a scar. Daniel, I didn't speak of the flowers anymore, but they were still there, not on the table, not wrapped in white paper, but rooted in the earth outside. Sometimes I'd see him tending to them quietly, trimming the wilted stems, whispering to himself. Every time I looked at him through the kitchen window, I could see the man he used to be and the one he was becoming. They were both there, broken and whole, guilty and kind, learning to exist together. Love after betrayal is never loud. It's quiet, deliberate, like rebuilding a house brick by brick while still living inside it. One Friday evening, I came home to find Daniel sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him and something wrapped in brown paper beside it. For a second, my heart stilled. "Please don't tell me that's what I think it is," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "Not exactly." He pushed the package toward me. "Open it." Inside wasn't a bouquet. It was a small photo frame, a picture of the garden, the yellow lilies in full bloom. Beneath it, he'd written in his careful handwriting, "For every flower I gave to say sorry, I plant one now to say thank you." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "I didn't want to give you any more flowers," he said. "Not the kind that die. I wanted to grow something that lasts. Something we could both take care of." For the first time, the gesture didn't feel like guilt. It felt like growth. We sat together that evening as the light faded, the air warm and heavy with summer. For once, we talked about Michael, really talked. Not as a wound, but as a memory we both shared. He was the first person who introduced me to lilies, Daniel said quietly. Did I ever tell you that? I shook my head. He said they were a reminder that life is both fragile and stubborn, that beauty grows even where it's not supposed to. He gave a small laugh. I think I forgot that for a long time. I reached across the table and took his hand. Maybe now you remember, I said. He squeezed my hand gently. Maybe. Weeks passed, and little by little, peace began to settle in. Not the dramatic kind, but the kind that comes in small, ordinary moments, shared coffee, evening walks, laughter that doesn't sound forced anymore. Sometimes I'd still wake up and think about the past. The woman named Rachel, the accident, the years of unspoken grief. But then I'd look outside and see the yellow lilies swaying in the morning breeze, and I'd remind myself that healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing to live despite remembering. Then one afternoon, I came home early from work. Daniel's car was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. I found him in the garden, kneeling by the lilies, his hands covered in soil. He looked up, smiling. "Hey, what are you doing?" I asked. He pointed to the patch of earth beside him. "Adding something new." I stepped closer. There among the yellow lilies were tiny buds, pale pink, delicate. "They're stargazer lilies," he said. "A new kind. They symbolize renewal." He looked at me carefully. I wanted something that was ours. Not his. Not hers. Ours. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just knelt beside him, touching the petals. They were soft and alive, like forgiveness finally taking root. That night, he came to bed later than usual. I felt the mattress shift as he lay down, his arm brushing mine. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" he asked quietly. I turned toward him. "Every day," I admitted. "But if they had been, maybe we wouldn't have learned how to be honest with each other." He smiled faintly. "I'm still learning. So am I." We lay there in the dark, not speaking. The sound of the garden outside, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind through flowers, felt like the world finally exhaling. A year to the day after I'd found the truth, Daniel woke me with breakfast and a folded note on the tray. "Open it," he said. Inside was a single pressed lily petal, yellow, and beneath it a short line. "This is the last bouquet." I looked up at him, puzzled. He smiled. "I mean, it's the last one that's about the past. From now on, everything we grow, everything we do, it's about now. About us." Tears welled up again, but this time they felt different. Not heavy, but cleansing. I reached for his hand and whispered, "Then let's begin again." And we did. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. Some nights we'd sit on the porch, watching the flowers sway under the moonlight. He'd tell me about his patients, I'd tell him about my day, and between us, the quiet hum of healing filled the air. Every once in a while, I'd still find a single bloom on the kitchen table. Not every Friday, not even every month, just once in a while. No card, just a single lily in a small vase. And every time I saw it, I didn't feel pain anymore. I felt gratitude for the man who'd broken, for the woman who'd stayed, and for the garden that taught them both how to grow again. Years later, when the yellow lilies had multiplied and the garden had turned wild with color, I pressed one between the pages of my old book, the same one that held the dried petals from our first anniversary. This time, I didn't keep it as a reminder of love or loss, but of something far more enduring, understanding. Because sometimes, love isn't about the flowers we give. It's about what we choose to plant after everything's fallen apart.